Yo, it's Mat4yo, and today I'd like to introduce you to the Chisel Lounge. This is actually going to be the reverse of a Chisel This episode, which is highly scripted, highly edited. This is going to be more of a relaxing thing, no script. I'm talking from the heart, off the top, and hopefully we can start including some guests into this program as well. As you'll see today, the episode is a discussion that I had with my fellow music partner, HoopsandHipHop, and together we've created an extended playlist, an album, if you will, targeting what we are most passionate about and putting it into musical form. It's called Passionroots. It came out last December. It's only 6 songs long, so I'd love for you to listen to it. You will find that there is a very deep story that not only exists within the album, but that was actually able to come out through this conversation. Not only was this a discussion, but it was also a question and answer type conversation that we've had with the Chiselers Club, who are my lovely patrons, and you'll hear from them as well. Let's jump right into the conversation. I think if there was one word to describe this entire year, it would definitely be passion. I've had a lot of things that I gained this year, a lot of things that I lost this year, and I'm sure that you all can empathize in one way or another. And all the while, the one thing that has just stayed true are the things that are in my roots and the things that I'm passionate about. And I've always been able to return to them because really nobody can take those things away from us. So Hoops and Hip Hop, a good friend of mine that I go back with, and we bonded over Pokemon, and we decided to take our passions for other things and not just Pokemon and kind of blend them together into this one colorful explosion of 6 songs of an album. And so I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we're going to hand it over to Kieran for our first question. So Hoops, give a little introduction.
Yo, what's up everybody? I'm Hoops and Hip Hop, and if you know me, you probably know me on YouTube from my channel where I do Pokemon stuff like Matt said. But as much as I absolutely love Pokemon, and that's kind of that's what basically got me into music production, because I've been doing Pokemon remixes forever. More recently, I've wanted to get into basically like hip-hop production, like making beats and stuff like that, because I love making remixes, but every once in a while I want to do something that's like my own or not Pokemon or something like that, just to kind of expand my musical horizons. And so that's kind of why it's been really good to link up with Matt, because he gives me an outlet to where I can make beats and kind of just get into that side of music, because it's kind of a whole different world, really. Even though there's a lot of it that's the same, there's a lot that's different. So being able to work with Matt allows me to just kind of work on that side of my musical skills, if you will, and just kind of experiment with different things, and it's been a whole lot of fun. So I've had a blast.
We fill in each other's gaps, because without Hoops, I would be just rapping a cappella, because I'm absolutely pitiful with music. And so he is laying the soundtrack to all of my thoughts and expressions at this time. And even though you're only really hearing my voice in the album, I want you to know that all of the words and the choices and the tones and emotions were really fueled by conversations that Hoops and I had together. And especially in some tracks more than others, even Hoops' own words come to life in the way that I wrote them. Because what we did actually was we had conversations back and forth, both on voice chat and in text, where we both took time, kind of isolate ourselves with our thoughts and just type down all of the things that we feel that we are going to try to illustrate in the song together. And I still have those paragraphs that Hoops wrote for us for particular songs that I really read and tried to excavate those feelings that he had and put them into the lyrics that I was writing. So it really is a cross-hatched process. It's really interwoven between the two of us. So we're going to open up the floor to Kieran, who is going to be our first Chiseler asking a question. Kieran, are you there? You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Yep.
All right, Kieran, let's hear your first question, and I'm going to repeat it once you're finished, and then I believe it's directed to Hoops, so he will answer for you.
My question to you is, what was it like working with Mat4yo on such a personal album?
So he asked, what is it like for you to work with somebody else on something that is otherwise so personal? How did you almost trust me with your personal emotions, and how did I trust you?
Okay, so this is actually a very good question because this is kind of where the album started. If you guys don't know, I don't know how much like background stuff Matt has told you guys, but if you don't know, the album really started for two reasons. One, it started because, like I said, I wanted to get into something that wasn't like making Pokemon remixes. I really wanted to make like beats to an actual song, and Matt's been my main link to that, as I said earlier. But the other thing that spurred this was actually the death of my grandfather, because my grandfather passed away about 2 years ago almost, and when I was at his funeral, my uncles and aunts, they read a poem that they had found in his desk that he had wrote, and I wanted to turn that into a song as a way to honor him. And when I had already had the idea in my head to kind of want to make music, like aside from remixes, I approached Matt with this idea of, hey, I have this song I want to make. It's really important to me. I want to like communicate like what my grandpa means to me and stuff like that. And it was a pretty crazy process, because on my end, I was obviously making the music and the beat and trying to convey how I felt in that moment and like through my life about my grandpa just in music without words. But then I had to trust Matt, with him knowing nothing about my grandpa, nothing about my family really. I had to kind of trust him to say what I couldn't, since I wasn't the vocalist. And so we got together and I laid the poem out in front of him that the song was about. I kind of just told him basically what my grandpa was all about, his personality, his life, just told him who my grandpa was. And then Matt took that and kind of just went into his cave, I guess, went into his his mode, if you will, and he wrote a beautiful song for Grassroots specifically. And that's kind of how it was more or less for all of the songs. That's the one that's kind of most near and dear to my heart for this project, but that's kind of how each and every song dissolved, is like either Matt had a theme or a message he wanted to get across, or I had something like that, and then we kind of just communicated that to each other as best we could, and he put the words out, I put the music and I guess you could say the feeling into it. And I think we, like you said earlier, we kind of filled in each other's spaces really well.
Yeah, I mean, Grassroots really was the standout on this album in terms of why we even started it in the first place. And I had a really different approach to it. And it really is a roller coaster going from when we first wrote it to where it is now, because, Hoops and I had this conversation and he told me all about his grandfather and just how, I guess, like stoic and kind of like a tree that he was, that you could just go to him for comfort, wisdom. And that's what I also looked for in my grandfather, who was alive at the time when we were writing this. And so I really looked at it like, well, he sees his grandfather almost like a tree somewhere he goes for comfort, and that's really how I see mine as well, in both literal and figurative sense, where I would go to his house and sit on the couch next to him, where he wouldn't really move, but he was a very traveled person and had all of these like lessons and history to share with me, to pass down. And that's where I got all of the language for Grassroots from. And so that was, I guess, back in February or so, or even earlier than that. And I wrote the whole piece, and we recorded it once, and I actually played that for my grandfather. And not a man of many words when it comes to being put on the spot. Definitely very opinionated, but he just sat there and kind of listened to it. And I know that both he and my grandmother were not very well with following along on the verbose things that I've put together in the past, with all the a lot of different words and rhetoric that they've never seen before. So I feel like it went over his head a little bit, but I think that it touched him, and he told me that it was very good. He told me it had too many words, but he really liked it, and that became a cornerstone for me to look to as he actually became sick over this past year and wound up passing away in June. And when he was in the hospital, I read out the lyrics to this song for him once more, and he told me, you better publish that. And tonight I can actually finally honor that last request of his that he had for me. And when he eventually passed, and I had the honor of eulogizing him, and this is funny that Hoops bring this up, that he actually discovered the poem at his grandfather's funeral, when at mine I used the eulogy to really illustrate what kind of person he was by reading an excerpt of the song that we had written together in light of his own grandfather. So the crazy thing about that is, like, these are two men that really inspire this entire album, never met each other, are somehow reunited now by their circumstances, and I hope that they're able to be together and meet one another and see the kind of oasis that they provided. But that's really what it was, that they created an oasis from which the two of us, Hoops and I, could actually cross paths and meet each other and find common ground to illustrate this feeling that I think many of us share, of a person in your life that you look to for guidance and wisdom and comfort. And I think that in both regards, on Hoops' end with creating the music, and in my end with taking that poem that his grandfather had written, the very first line of the poem being equivalent to the very first line of our song Grassroots, but then taking a different path and writing my own version of that from that first line moving forward. I think that we both paid tribute to our grandparents, and that they are very, very proud of us for what we accomplished.
You know, I think that's actually really insane, because the one thing I kept thinking throughout this whole process, because I came to you not long after I had the idea of creating the song, which was it was January of 2018. It was when this all went down, when we had the funeral, and I had first heard the poem when they read it at the funeral. So it was like early 2018 when I first came to you with this idea. And just because of life and everything getting in the way, it took this long, not necessarily to make this one song, but just to get the album together. And it's kind of crazy because it took way longer than it should have, really. But through taking that extra amount of time, that's kind of what enveloped your grandpa into this. Because
Right.
Before, it was kind of just about me, it was about my life, and you were just the vocalist for it. But then things started to get, unfortunately, more serious for you on your end, with the same exact person that had like sprouted up the inspiration for the song on my end. And then to hear that my grandpa's poem, which was essentially read at his funeral in his eulogy, I guess, like ended up making its way into your grandfather's eulogy. I think like that's the kind of story that like you hear in Hollywood. It's like that's like
Right.
a movie script almost.
Yeah,
And
it really is.
It's kind of just the way it panned out. Like it wasn't planned or anything like that. It just happened that way. And the fact that it all kind of linked up together, I think really shows how like special of a song it is.
Yeah, I mean, it ran its natural course. The song, it took the time that it needed due to cosmic circumstances or whatever you may have. And that's even another theme of the album, too. So it really came full circle by the end. And even though, you know, we take the time to mourn, just dumbfounded and blindsided by the loss in our lives, we are able to find new things from that as well. And what the song and the whole album will really do for us is make a bookmark on history at this point in our lives, and be able to texturize what exactly we were feeling, the bittersweetness of it all, and it'll make sure that our grandparents are not forgotten. It's really writing it into human nature, into the laws of nature, or whatever it may be. It is giving them a permanent stake in history. And so hopefully that gives us both the comfort that we're looking for.
For sure. And then one final point on that, as far as remembering our grandparents, that's kind of why I wanted to put that little excerpt, my grandpa's voicemail at the beginning. And that even is kind of a funny story as far as preserving them goes, because at the time, my aunts and my uncles were kind of desperately trying to find a way to get that voicemail off of his phone because that was basically the last spoken word, I guess, that we really had of him. And it was kind of so important to us, to the point where they kept paying his phone bill just so it could stay alive while we tried to figure it out. And one day when I was starting to put the instrumental together, I had the idea to just, well, it's already phone quality sound anyway, so why don't I just call my grandpa's phone, hold my phone up to the mic with it on speaker, and just record it and see how it turns out. And so that's what I did. I called my grandpa's phone, it was on speaker, recorded it with my mic, and it just ended up sounding perfectly. And I think that was just another poetic element to this song that I was able to kind of extract that as well, and then put it into the song for it to be remembered forever, essentially.
Especially a bittersweet thing, knowing that there would be no answer on the other end, but that it would be a different type of response that you would be able to preserve forever. That was the thing. And the other thing, and I know that I'd mentioned this to the patrons before, but the voice quote at the very end of the song is simply my grandfather saying "very good," and that is actually his exact reaction in the moment that I first played this song for him, and I recorded that. And so you're literally hearing in real time my grandfather react to hearing that song conclude for the very first time. That recording is forever preserved at the end of that track.
That's crazy. I think, I don't know, just kind of talking it out makes me realize how much more important and valuable and deep this song really is than what I guess I initially had thought of, because I knew it was deep, but I guess I really only knew my half of it. So hearing your half and all those little things, I knew that was your grandpa at the end, but I didn't know it was that live recording as you played it. And it's just kind of seeing how it all comes together like that, just through pure circumstance. I think it's a story that should be shared personally, because just kind of keeping it between, even though it is a personal story, it's something that's just I feel like it should be shared, because it's pretty crazy how just interwoven this all became in such a perfect way.
Yeah, we're gonna find a way to do that, I promise. We're gonna make a video for this, like we've been working on all summer long. Every week I've been to the park, I've recorded video, you've recorded video. We're gonna put something together. We're gonna get this story out there. But just to say, you were saying you haven't even realized how deep it is. We haven't even talked about the lyrics at all. It's just the premise alone has that much power to it. So yeah, dude, I can't be more thankful to have done this with you, this whole album, not even just the one song. So really thankful for it. I love the way it turned out. Love the friendship I have with you. Can't thank you enough.
Same to you, brother.
All right, brother.
Absolutely.
So Josh wants to know what the objects in the tree are supposed to represent. I'll explain mine, the ones that I picked, and then Hoops can go for the one that either he picked or I picked to represent him. So first of all, we got the Game Boy Advance. We're talking about things that are just forever etched into our hearts. We're talking about our most special gaming utensil. We still are gamers ourselves. We move forward with the new technology, but the Game Boy Advance always has an extremely special place in my heart. That's why Hoops has the Game Boy Color there as well. We have a sword and shield. So just like I said, moving forward with the new times, we wanted to make sure that we captured everything that we're feeling right now in this moment. What we're excited for is included in that. And so Pokemon Sword and Shield is something that we wanted to memorialize in the tree. We also have a crown for Kingdom Hearts 3, something that was a huge part of my life, something I waited over a decade for, that we finally got to experience together earlier this year. I also have a soccer ball. Wanted to make sure that I captured that childish, rambunctious feeling that I used to have when I would just run out, and all I cared about was getting that soccer ball into the net whenever we played a game. And it was so dramatic in that moment, and looking back on it now, obviously it was so small in the grand scheme of things, but there's something so magical and wonderful about only being hyper focused on that one thing. And we try to do that nowadays with distractions and relaxation, but it's really hard to ever fully get into a state where you're laser focused on something. And hopefully we did that with this album. There's a peanut in the top right corner, something just to represent my grandfather, hopefully as an extension also Hoops' grandfather, because my grandfather loved peanuts, and he always joked around. He said when he goes, he doesn't care what we do with him because he will have done everything that he needed to do on earth, and he said just put him in a chock full of nuts jar. So I always laughed at that. And that's why I put the peanut up there. Otherwise, for me, there's a camera, because I'm really the videographer, the editor of the whole scheme. And there's also the masquerade mask for Masquerade, and everything else is something that represents Hoops. But really quick, there's also some things that are not in the tree. So each of us have a fruit, we each have a flower, and we each have two things in our hands, one to represent the role we played on the album, and another to represent something that is special and dear to our hearts. Mine being Polywhirl, for obvious reasons, explored in my previous album. But I'll pass it on over to Hoops to kind of give his point of view of the other things that are in the tree.
Okay, well, as far as like the things that are in the tree specifically, I know you kind of handled a lot of that since you were the architect of the art, but I see what it looks to be a shoe, which definitely represents me because that's like hand in hand with basketball. I'm kind of a sneaker freak in a way, but the biggest thing for me is the basketball. Obviously, Hoops and Hip Hop, that's my name, and it's funny because on the surface level, that's what it looks like. It's just a basketball reference because I like basketball, and like in a way that's what it is. And people always say, why is your name Hoops and Hip Hop if you talk about Pokemon or whatever? Well, first off, it's kind of like primarily it's because I just made up the name when I didn't know what I was doing YouTube wise, and so I came up with something that I guess wasn't as optimal, but it turned out to be really, really good because not only like do I love the sport of basketball and playing it and everything, but it's through the game that I ended up doing literally everything that I'm doing in my life right now, from the point when I started to fall in love with basketball when I was 11 years old. Because when I started playing basketball, I started taking it more seriously, and so I started getting into that culture, I guess you could say, of basketball. And what kind of goes hand in hand with basketball is hip-hop music. And so I started getting exposed to hip-hop music a little bit more through my exposure to basketball, and through the exposure to hip-hop music just grew this desire of, man, that's really cool how they like sample one song and make it into a beat. And so I started to get fascinated with actual music production, and from there getting fascinated in music production, and having my previous love of just video games and Pokemon and whatever you want to call it previously embedded in me from like earlier in my childhood, those things decided to come together, and I decided, hey, I want to make remixes. And through making remixes, I started to get exposed to obviously YouTube in general, and that's what expanded me into making just the videos I do now. So in a way, even though I really have nothing to do with basketball in terms of the content I make, it all started from basketball. I guess you could say the root of my creation, me as a creator and as a person, comes from basketball. And so it has a deeper meaning than just, hey, I like to play basketball. So
it's really written in the stars, because that is exactly what the object in my hand, Polywhirl, represents for me. Because if not for the Polywhirl doll that I was gifted by my uncle when I was 7 years old, I would not have stuck with Pokemon the way that I did, and that would not have carried me into YouTube, into making Pokemon videos, into meeting you. So when we talk about Passionroots, the two things that are in our hands are really the material object that is connected to what we became and who we are today. It's so perfect that you have that experience with a basketball the same way I have it with the Polywhirl doll. just to wrap up this point on the album art, we wanted it to be a time capsule in every sense of the word, and so we did that with the music, the lyrics, and we also did it with the album art, which I will take time to say that even though I drew this on paper, that the person who asked this question, Josh, is responsible for tracing it on the computer with a custom sketch that he created, and also colorizing it. And he also did the Phrenology artwork, did a spectacular job with this 9,000 by 9,000 pixel artwork that you can get lost in forever. I am in love with the quality of it, and I have to thank you, Josh, for helping us achieve that.
Yeah, you did fantastic, bro. I didn't know that.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so Tyler's here. We're going to see if Tyler has a question.
So, I mean, I guess my question would be, like, obviously you talked about your grandfather's a lot. Is there another central concept that you guys explored in this album? And also, Hoops, out of curiosity, do you have any training in, like, music theory?
So the question was, aside from the grandparents, is there any specific theme that we both tackled together? And then an additional question would be Hoops' background in music theory. So Hoops, why don't you get that second question out of the way first, and then I'll leave it to you to describe in your point of view what you think another shared theme was. Because I certainly have the answer for that, but I don't want to be the one to say it first. I want to hear what you say. So go ahead and answer the music theory question, and then go back to the themes.
Okay, so as far as the music theory question goes, I have very minimal training because the extent of my formal music instruction, I guess you could say, is I took some guitar lessons when I was like 12, 13 and learned how to play the guitar a little bit, and then I kind of like fizzled out on that, and then I took 1 semester of music theory in college, and from there, like that's literally like all the formal training I have. The most of what I know comes from essentially just teaching myself and figuring it out, which is very, very hard, especially when you want to do so much, but it's very possible at the same time, especially when like we have the technology we have today with computers being able to do so much. So essentially I just worked really hard at it and did it as often as I could, because really the more you mess around with it, the more you're going to figure out how to do. And the more I started listening to music, I guess from like an analytical perspective or standpoint, the more I realized that music is like, it's very formulaic. It has a formula, it has a structure, it has a pattern. And if you can figure out those patterns and like how each song kind of ebbs and flows and has like just the way it works, you can build that structure without really knowing a lot about like music and scales and major minor chords and all that stuff. So I'm definitely self-taught for sure, and I'm definitely like, I know I can get way better than I am right now, and knowing music theory could probably help me do that, but I definitely am a huge proponent of like, you can just like, if you want to do something, like you don't need to worry about like formal training. Obviously that could help, but if you love something, just dive into it. Like there's so much you can do if you just kind of like commit yourself to something in that way. And then as far as the theme of the whole album itself, I would say it has a lot to do, I guess, about like reflection and nostalgia, I would say, because like obviously there's the one song that started it all, Grassroots, where we're kind of just looking back at like family and stuff like that, but the other songs tend to bring about a sense, I guess, of just reflection and just kind of reminiscing, I guess, because I think I find myself doing that a lot at this point in my life, where I finished high school, I finished college, I'm seeing everyone that I know from my life either get married or have kids, and even in my own personal friend group, it's like they're starting to get picked off one by one as far as like getting married and having kids and stuff like that. So that kind of thing makes you think about what you've done with your life, where you are, all the good times you've had. And so I guess with the beats that I made and kind of some of the song concepts I personally like came up with myself before I like relayed them to Matt had a lot to do with that. Like for instance, Cosmic Wanderer is a lot about that as well. Like, I made that beat when I was in a very reflective place of like nostalgia and just kind of thinking about my life. And so I would say a lot of the songs to that degree have that kind of theme.
Yeah, I mean, Hoops, how old are you?
I'm 25.
25. Okay, I'm 23. So we're roughly the same age. And I feel like anybody who is our age would really empathize with what we're going through right now. We're about to be adults. A lot of people consider us adults, but there is so much from our childhood that we are still hanging on to and in some ways don't want to move on from. And that can mean one of many things. To me, exploring that element of myself through this album allowed me to recognize the very important lesson that this divide between being an adult and a child is not a brick wall on the side of black and white. It is just an arbitrary title to give somebody. It doesn't matter whether you're a toddler or a father, you're following the same heartbeat, you know? So you never have to lose the things that you love just because somebody says that you're an adult now. Like, and so what we're experiencing is that like different things like work and paying the bills are pulling us away from those things that we used to spend so much time with. Those things that have carved concave hearts into us and don't ever want to leave. And we don't have to lose them, you know? But there's good and bad things in holding on to them. Like I said, with during Concave Heart, one of the lines that I said was, I just keep on repeating all my history and reveries, and I never make new memories. You know, that's not a hard and fast truth, but it's just something that I recognize whenever I get time off and all I want to do is lay in bed and like replay an old video game or something like that. Like, how much of my current life am I spending like reliving old things, and am I not creating new things to relive when I'm even older than I am now? So it's this constant push and pull about how much of your life right now you want to be spending doing certain things, how much of it do you want to spend making new memories, how much of it do you want to spend reliving old memories, and if you don't do enough of one or the other, are you going to lose either of them? You know, it's this constant struggle that we're facing every single day, and we just wake up in bed and think, what do I want to do today? You know, that Polyworlds question that I posed last album. And so with Concave Heart and Cosmic Wanderer, we really looked to encapsulate that. Concave Heart being the more, I guess, pessimistic side of it, where it's like, I really want to just crawl in a hole and just play my old video games and never leave my bedroom and just be a kid forever. And then Cosmic Wanderer is the one where you accept time is constantly moving and you're moving along with it, but no matter how far or no matter how much you grow, you're never moving so far enough away from the things that you love because they're in your heart. You never have to lose them if you don't want to. You know, that's the thing I keep coming back to. And so both Concave Heart and Cosmic Wanderer tackle two different sides of that. The other thing that Hoops was mentioning about seeing all friends and family grow up and things like that is something that I wanted to capture in our song Brand New Life. And as I said earlier, that making this album, we wanted to create a time capsule of what we're feeling right now. I looked at Brand New Life as saying, like, here's like a clean slate, like something to start over with, where we can say, all right, this is the beginning of a new era, so breathe in a brand new life. And the metaphor that I used to talk about that is actually somebody being born. So the way that Brand New Life works is that the very beginning of the song is the beginning of somebody's life, and they're born, and the way that you are able to derive that from context clues is when I say, sun rays rain upon my young face. Now, young face doesn't mean too much in that moment until you get to the second verse and you realize that in the next verse, something that I'm saying is, this land is filled with natural blessings. Such attractions are distracted by my adolescence. So now I'm an adolescent. I was a young face. Now I'm an adolescent. And now in the third verse begins, so time lent me its legs and I've grown now. I can see above the storm cloud. So each verse has several different things that progresses naturally one after the other. The first verse being that we are young, the second one is that we're adolescent, and the third is that we're grown adults now. There's also another thing that carries on through the verses. So one of those things is the weather. Sun rays rain upon my young face. In the second verse, the sun sets and I'm enraptured by this foggy weather. So I'm a confused adolescent. I'm going through puberty. I'm questioning things about life and myself. And then the third verse, I can see above the storm clouds. And so I've grown so tall that I've looked beyond and above all those things I used to worry about, and now I can move forward with a clear vision. The other thing that we wanted to carry throughout the verses is I specifically asked Hoops to give me 3 things that he finds himself really fascinated with right now. And one of the things that he said was the fact that people are growing so much around him, and that even though like we keep meeting more and more people, that those connections that we make never go away, and we still are able to contact and connect with the people that we've met long ago. And so I used that opportunity to include that in one of those verses that parallel each other. So the first verse talks about nature and the things that I'm just naturally amazed with. So I'm saying there's a flower on the front page of planet Earth. It's about as glorious as the person that planted her. So I'm talking about these wonders of life that got me in awe. There's 3 of them in the song, and in the first verse it's nature. The second verse is a little less obvious, but I start to nibble at it when I start saying, referee, etch-a-sketching, Ask Jeeves, tiny LED screen, button pressing. Now you start to get it that we're talking about technology and fascinated by video games and computers and the internet and things like that. And then that third verse finally gets to that thing that Hoops answered my question with. There's people growing in mysterious ways. That line was derived exactly from that sentiment that Hoops gave me. People are getting married and they're moving away and they're growing up and they're having kids, but it's such a wild slice of life that no jar can contain. But a heart is not the same. A heart does not have a finite space inside of it. And no matter how far away, I will keep you, and everybody else that I'm close with right here in my frame. And when I say frame, I don't just mean a photo frame, but I mean the skeletal frame in which our heart resides. There is no limit. There's no physical limit to how many connections can be contained in there. And the way that I viewed that, I illustrated that visually, is by that very next line that says, thorns and petals spiral from my chest like a projector. I'm talking about all those thorny projections and connections with people that grow like wildlife that I mentioned earlier in that verse. Thorns and petals spiral from my chest like a projector. Which direction they will vector in, no human being can measure. And I'm saying, just what a testament that our imagination is so vast and unlimited that we can remember and connect all these people together. And that's really what it came back down to, is finding those 3 things that fascinate and amaze us in this moment. What texturizes the zeitgeist or the feeling of the moment that we're in right now? What defining ideals are of 2019 for the 2 of us being in our early to mid 20s. And I hope that with that song, particularly Brand New Life, and the rest of the album, that we illustrated that for people to not only think of new things for themselves, but also to relate to the things that they're already feeling in their hearts.
Ditto. Yeah, I think the album as a whole is really interesting. The more we talk about it, the more it kind of just weaves itself together really well, because you were talking about on Concave Heart, you were talking about things that like you don't want to let go, you want to hold on to. Well, that song in particular, obviously it's about the video games. It's about the more, I guess, materialistic or shallow stuff, whatever you want to call it. But that also applies to what songs like Grassroots are talking about, that are more emotional, because obviously you've got family members and stuff, so there's 2 sides of it. And there's the songs like Concave Heart that are talking about kind of, I guess, one half of our life, and then there's the songs like Grassroots that are talking about the other half. but the lessons and the messages that they're speaking apply to both sides at the same time. So
Right. I mean, the same way you don't want to let video games go, you don't want to let that feeling of being with your grandfather go either. And
Right.
even though it's not as obtainable anymore as, say, a video game is, something that is material and that lasts forever, that feeling never has to go away as long as you remember it. And so that's why I illustrated that as something carving a space into your heart. Concave being the opposite of convex, which is meaning that something goes inside, like the interior of a spoon, as opposed to outside, which would be the back of a spoon, and convex. And so that's the way that I saw that, as something just carving a place in your heart, and it stays there and it doesn't leave. And I use those images in the lyrics. Before we wrap this up, Hoops, there's 2 dark horses on this album that we have not mentioned at all yet: Masquerade and Smell the Roses.
Okay. Starting with Masquerade, I basically wanted to make a fast rap instrumental, like something that you could just like go ballistic with, you know? Like I wanted to make one of those types of songs and basically make something that was like kind of like a puff out your chest, like you basically like show what you're made of, essentially. Like it's like a flex type of song. That's a good way to put it. A flex type of song. So that's what I was going for there. And then with Smell the Roses, it's really funny because I honestly can't even really remember what I was doing, because that beat was never originally meant to get sent to you, because I was making it, and I remember at the time it was like I had made it, it was good, like I liked it, but for whatever reason I didn't like it enough to send it to you. So I just quit and just gave up on it, but I never deleted the session file. And then when I was going to find another file that you had asked me to find, I stumbled upon that and I was like, whoa, like this is actually good. Like, why didn't I just like kind of send this to him and see what he thought? You liked it, and then that's kind of just took off from there. But that one was it was definitely a more interesting one for sure.
The great things about those 2 songs is that they're almost the opposite in terms of the conceptual design from the other 4 that are on the album. Real quick thing about Smell the Roses. So you said that you stumbled upon that by accident. The album, as far as I was concerned, was totally done with 5 songs. I was happy and content, and then you sent that my way, and I'm like, this is an alley-oop right here. You know, I can't let this one slide. This is a beautiful thing in the making right here that I have to react to. So basically, these 2 instrumentals were designed kind of independently from both of our minds. So we weren't really looking for a particular concept. It was just like, make good beats, because we need some upbeat, you know, rapping songs on here as well. And the cool thing about that is both of us have an opportunity to look at a blank slate and find something that we can latch onto and be inspired by. And then that begins with Hoops, and then he passes the baton to me. And basically, I listen to the song that he created, not knowing where he was coming from inspiration-wise, but I hear it through my own filter. And I think, what does this make me think of? What kind of emotions do I feel when I hear this? And where does it, what kind of setting does it place me in visually? Even though there's no visual element, you know, what am I conjuring in my head, whether subconsciously or not, when I'm listening to this track? And for Masquerade, it just seemed to perfectly fall into place. Like, I just imagined being in this really crowded, higher-end, elitist party where everybody was wearing these masquerade masks, and I just kind of walked in, like, not really being invited, but just kind of stole the show. And when I thought of that, it immediately brought me into the headspace of Persona 5, because I had just began playing it earlier that year. And I actually wrote the song before I completed Persona 5, and then I went on to actually complete the game. And that game, I mean, it changed my life. It really did. And if anybody is hesitant to play it, I really recommend it, because I didn't feel like the character Joker did the crazy things that he does. I felt like I did them. I felt like I was infiltrating people's minds and stealing what is so precious to them. And I tried to to use that as an opportunity to create lyrical showcase in the braggadocious way that one normally does, but to actually give a contextual reason for it instead of just saying, yeah, I'm the best and that's what the song's about, I'm the best. You know, I wanted to create this fake persona, for lack of a better term, where I was somebody who is totally braggadocious and overzealous and proud of themselves and thinks that they're the best, and basically bring that back down to earth at the end and say, you know, I can create a fake character and just rap for days, and that's exactly what I did right here. But when the colors fade and the decorations get thrown away, if there ain't a face that you're happy with, then I'm afraid you just lost the game. So all these people who are going out and spending all this money and living lavishly and having these, you know, these cocktail parties and whatnot, at the end of the night, when you go home and you take off all the makeup, if you're not happy with yourself, then what was the point to begin with? And so that's where the moral of that song comes from. And that's why I was able to basically get away with all of the types of lyrical showcase that are in it. It's basically the Eminem conundrum where I can get away with anything, I can say anything and you laugh because there's a puppet on my hand. That's the kind of player, the kind of character, the persona that I am in Masquerade. And then with Smell the Roses, there's another opportunity to really listen to that song and think, what am I listening to? Where is this placing me geographically? Like, what does it make me think of? What kind of setting am I seeing in my head? And the first thing I thought of was like a Western. It obviously has this like Latin Spanish flair to it with the guitar. And that was my original take on it. Like something about like cowboys and knights in shining armor, and I was kind of going down this path. Like I can be a cowboy in the middle of the night, or I can be a knight in shining armor, but at the end of the day, like what does that mean about me? Or this idea, I'm like, stop right there. This shouldn't just be another lyrical showcase. Do you have an opportunity here with this kind of, you know, darker, slower instrumental to actually create a thought experiment similar to things I've done in the past, which one example in particular would be a video I uploaded called A la Flambe, which is actually not a rap, but is something that I called a rhyme story, which does rhyme, but there's no music. Instead, it is more of a poetic thought experiment where it poses a moral conundrum onto the listener and asks them to decide what they would choose in that situation. And at the end of the day, the protagonist that you come up with makes a decision, and that gives you an inclination as to what the consequences would be if you were to have made the same decision. And so what I thought of for Smell the Roses, I don't remember exactly where the motifs came from, being flowers, but as soon as I latched onto that, like all they want to do is just frolic through a garden and smell the roses, and they don't want to pay any attention to like how the roses got there in the first place, or what's keeping the roses there. And that for me was an allegory for freedom, the freedom that we have to make an album like this and not be censored at all, not have anybody tell us what we have to write or what we have to include or don't have to include in this album. You know, we have so much to be thankful for because we're able to produce this album, and a lot of that comes from our freedom and those who protect our freedom. So I really wanted to create an allegory about that. So in the song itself, we're dealing with a hero, a protagonist that sits on the coast and watches to make sure that the horde of locusts that comes through does not reach the flowers and ravish them, because then there would be no flowers left to smell. So that person is there protecting all of the people in the community who are enjoying the flowers every day. But when he comes back to the island and they all see him, they're like, yo, what are you doing? All this violence and this anger that you're creating when you're fighting with the locusts. You need to stop fighting with them. Come join us and smell the roses. But you don't realize that the reason the roses are there is because that person is protecting them for you. And so the second verse continues with that, where there's a child who accidentally starts a fire. The hero saves him from the fire, but everybody's like, oh, why were you fighting with fire? Why were you playing with fire in the rose bush? You need to enjoy the roses. You need to smell them. And then finally he gives in at the end of the thought experiment, and there's no more roses left to smell because nobody is protecting them. And that's what would happen if nobody was there to protect our freedoms. We would not have any songs left. We would have no albums left. And so what I really want you to do is discover that for yourself when you listen to the song. And if it means something different to you, that's a great thing, because I specifically write it so that it doesn't necessarily force you to believe the allegory that I create, but instead creates an allegory that's open to interpretation. I tried to do that a lot with Foreignology. I tried to do that even better with Smell the Roses. And I hope that whether you got the allegory I was going for or not, that you felt something when you listened to that song, and you thought of something new. And at the end of the day, this whole album, what I really wanted to do, and I'm sure Hoops would be in agreement with me, is lean into, and empathize with the things that you are feeling in your everyday, to know that you're not alone in feeling them, and to hear from somebody else's perspective on how to deal with feeling them. And then also to learn new things that other people are going through, and learn how they are coping and reacting to them, and how you might be able to use that lesson in your life if you were to ever be faced with a similar circumstance. So hopefully that's what Smell the Roses does. Hopefully that's what Brand New Life does, what Grassroots, what Concave Heart, what Masquerade, and what Cosmic Wanderer will do for you when you listen to Passionroots. I love it. Well, I have to just thank you again, in person. I know that we exchange a lot via Twitter message and text message and whatnot, but I really want to take the opportunity to just congratulate you on the incredible pieces of music that you put together, the way that you have illustrated and colored in all of the color by number spaces in my imagination that I've only been able to draft in black and white. You really provided the soundtrack for all that I felt this year in general, and I'm really, really happy with the way that it came out. I just hope that more people are able to empathize and relate to it, because if we don't have that human connection, if we don't have those emotions to share with one another and to be able to discuss them openly with transparency, then I'm not sure we really have anything at all. So I'm really happy that I have that with you.
Yeah, and I think the exact same thing on the other side of the coin, where I'm really glad that I kind of have you as an outlet to vocalize and sing the songs that I want to essentially sing myself, but I can't, because that's not what I do. I sing with the notes, not the vocal cords. So I think we play off each other really well, and so I'm really excited that we got the chance to do this, and I really am glad that we got a chance to kind of talk in depth about it, because then we find out cool things that we didn't necessarily know about each song. I think this discussion has showed the album is really well put together, and all the pieces kind of just fell into place. And I think they fell into place because the music came from a place of pure intentions. It wasn't just kind of just throwaway music, or we need to make the next big summer hit or something like that. It wasn't superficial. It was a real, we had a real meaning and a real purpose for creating the music, and we wanted to share a real message. And I think that when you create anything from that space, but especially music, it kind of tends to line up a little bit better. And I think the fact that it did so well for us, despite us kind of being on opposite ends of the spectrum as far as song production goes, I think that kind of proves it. So overall, I'm just really excited about it.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing that I have neglected to mention the entire conversation so far, is that this whole album really is a reaction to people having expectations of me or telling me to do one thing. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do what makes me happy. I'm going to do what I'm passionate about. And that's going to produce the most pure, raw, emotional, true to my heart content that I could ever create. It's not a Chisel This that people are begging me to make that I really don't care for or have the time for. It is something that I wanted to do. And yeah, I had to make a sacrifice to do that. I had to basically not make Chisel This for a couple months in order to use the little free time that I had to do something that I really wanted to do. I have a full-time job now, and that started this year. That's one of the things that I gained this year. And one of the things I lost was a lot of free time. And so I decided that for the free time that I do have, I want to make sure that I'm putting myself in a place where where I can thrive, where I am most comfortable, where I am doing the things that I want to do and that I'm passionate about. And so that's really where the name of this album comes from. It is driven by a passion that we have, and it is about the roots that we have grown individually and also the ones that we share together. And so hopefully you see that too.
Beautiful.
All right, buddy. That'll do it for our discussion. I want to thank everybody who listened to this. Hopefully you felt something new when you go back and listen to Passionroots, although it is only a 6-track album. Hope that you find hours worth of contemplation within it, and hopefully you share your thoughts and reactions with us. Hoops, can't thank you enough. Love you, man. I'm Mat4yo. That's all for yo today.